Everyone. Good morning to those who are joining us in the United States, and good afternoon to those who are joining us from Europe and Turkey. As you all know, Turkey just had a historic election yesterday, Sunday. Today, as promised, we are doing our webinar. Kılıç ran several sessions last week with other hosts, including Burhanettin Duran from SETA in Turkey, and he evaluated different dynamics of the elections, political discussions, debates in Turkey. And today he's joining us as a panelist along with Burhanettin Duran. I will be asking them questions, and I will be asking them whether they are surprised by the results. Before turning over to them very quickly, let me summarize the election results. There were four candidates on the ballot. One of them had pulled out in the last minute, and President Erdogan received 49.5% of the votes. That's about 27 million votes. And his main opponent, Kemal Kilicdaroglu, received 44.89% of the votes, and that's about 24.5 million votes. And then the third candidate, Sinan Oğan, received 5.17% of the votes, and that was about 2.8 million votes. And then in the parliamentary elections, President's coalition, election coalition, was able to muster enough MP seats in the parliament to have the majority, and then the opposition party, the main opposition party, CHP, has received something like 25% of the votes, as opposed to AK party's 35% of the votes. Before getting lost in the numbers and how these are, going to be playing out in the weeks and months ahead, I want to turn to my panelists to receive their first reactions and overall assessment of the political results. Of course, first the political assessments, and we will towards the middle of this webinar, we'll be talking about the foreign policy implications as well, and we would like to receive as many questions as possible. Please let us know your questions by posting them on the Q&A box. So I want to turn to Professor Duran first. Welcome to this webinar. Give us your assessment of the election results.
Thank you, Kadir.
I'm sorry. I just realized I failed to mention that there will be a second round. We are going to a runoff election on May 28th. That's official now, because Erdogan's votes just fell below 50%, 49.5%. So my apologies. Professor Duran, please.
Yeah, thank you, Kadir. Well, you said it was a great surprise to somebody for seeing these results in Turkey. Well, for the elections of presidential elections, the result was not a surprise to me, actually, because I was expecting that President Erdogan would take 48, 49, maybe in the first round. In these competitive elections, he can be the first runner and getting the result in the first round. But with only small margin, small percentage, that it will be the second round for the result, for the a certain result of the presidential elections. But of course, there are some unexpected results as far as I consider. For example, AK Party, as I was expecting that AK Party would take 1 or 2% higher than 35. But overall, People's Alliance result is almost 50%. That is something expected and enough to have majority in the parliament. Of course, this is a first advantage and big advantage for President Erdogan for the second round. And also MHP took 10%, and it is higher than the pollsters told us during the election campaigns. And also 2.8 for a new Islamist party. It is also in the Refah Party, it's also higher than expected. But mostly CHP followers and the supporters of a nation's allies, actually they are disillusioned with the results, because they were expecting that Kilicdaroglu would take the presidential election in the first round with at least 55%. But Kilicdaroglu took 10% less. So this created a resentment, a great resentment among the CHP followers, among the nation's alliance voters. And this is something very critical for the second round. Now moral priority, moral superiority is on the side of President Erdogan. And now many people are telling us that President Erdogan will likely take the second round in a very comfortable way, very easily. So this means the nation's alliance will take their hats into their table and will try to have new campaigns to get rid of this moral, let's say, problems in their voters. And one last sentence about is the nationalist voters. And Sinan Ogan's 5% tell us that for the second round, nationalist voters are in a very important position to shape the result. So it means that left party, pro-PKK, HDP party, will take many criticism from different parties and from People's Alliance, and they are not in a key position in the parliament. So this means that this party didn't get the result that they expected before the elections.
Thank you, Professor Duran. Kılıç, you're somebody who I discussed the numbers, I think, in this election season the most. You're very well versed in the, pre-election, the research, polls, and etc. And this is, at the end of the day, this is a surprise when you look at the polls. But it may not be so much of a surprise when you see that, there was a lot of resistance to Kilicdaroglu's, candidacy from his own coalition partners prior to the election, right? At some point, it looked like the table of six could actually, collapse. And so when you look at that picture, I'm not asking about the pollsters. You're free to, comment on them. But what struck you the most last night? What is the big news for you from last night?
I think let me say a few words at the beginning about the polls, because in our panel on Friday with Burhanettin Duran and İlnur Çevik, we were discussing the polls as well. And as you may recall, in the panel, I said there are competition of the polls, there are rivalry of the polls. So I see probably in all of the elections I followed, I never see this many polls showing so many different results. And when we look at some of those polls, we actually see that Erdogan's vote was somewhere between 51% to 49%. And there were pollsters who said that. And when I have a chance to discuss this matter with some of the party officials, they were also confident about this vote. So when some of the pollsters showed that Erdogan's vote was around 42 to 43%, and some of our friends right now who are following us on Zoom, we have this conversation with them. And I told them that I am highly suspicious about those numbers for different reasons. So was it a surprise? If you ask AK Party, it is not a surprise. Because in AK Party last night, in its Istanbul headquarters and other places, there was some kind of sadness that they couldn't win it in the first round. So there was this high optimism about the fact that they will win it in the first round. And regarding the opposition and why opposition did so poorly, I think since the beginning of the debate about the presidential candidate of the opposition parties, Kemal Kilicdaroglu has been the weakest. And there were a lot of opposition, including E-Party, opposed it until the very last moment. Mm-hmm. There were concerns that some other candidates may do it better. After yesterday's results, we are not sure about that, because we have seen that Erdogan got so much of the popular vote that even if other candidates, the two mayors was the candidates, which they were almost candidates in this election, vice presidential candidates, they couldn't do as much. I think the main problem in the opposition was opposition created a united front, but never created a united agenda to resolve the country's problems. So when we look at the promises that opposition candidate did, Kemal Kilicdaroglu did, he was pursuing a kind of relatively effective campaign on Twitter every evening, showing up and promising new things for different voter blocks. But these promises didn't provide a united policy agenda for these 6 different political parties. So the promises and their election memoranda didn't convince most of the voters about their ability to resolve the problems. And the fact that they had these disagreements until very last moment about the candidate, because they have been meeting more than a year now. In every month they had these regular meetings, and many people who wanted to vote for the opposition parties basically expected a more coordinated campaign, a more coordinated electoral discourse. And it didn't happen, and we have seen how different the candidates were from each other. Each and every time a vice presidential candidate show up on TV interview, we have seen that it generated a controversy with the other political parties, from economy to women's rights, all of those things. So that was one reason. The second thing that shows that one of the most significant thing was the nationalist votes. And nationalist votes, when we say nationalist votes, it was partly a reaction to HDP support for the opposition bloc. So it provided some of Kurdish votes in the southeast, but it also generated huge reaction among nationalist voters to opposition parties. And thirdly, I think from the very beginning, there was this presumption that anti-Erdoganism in Turkey is the biggest coalition and biggest voting bloc. So just to have an agenda of, like giving an electoral defeat for Erdogan, and a promise of a post-Erdogan Turkey would be sufficient to defeat himself and alliance. And I think it was wrong. And more than that. Of course, there were some people who were mobilized by, yes.
It just froze for a moment. If you could repeat your last sentence, that would be great.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know where it was stopped. So
no
many in the opposition, there was this presumption that anti-Erdoganism would be sufficient as a campaign tool to mobilize the masses and defeat Erdogan in the election. And it turns out to be wrong. Turkish electorates needed more than anti-Erdogan discourse in the electoral campaign. And I think it is still, we will have a second round, but the initial results, especially the difference, almost 2.5 million difference between two candidates, after so much campaign and after so much optimism, because the last campaign of the opposition was, let's finish it in the first round. So there was this belief that Kilicdaroglu is already ahead of Erdogan, but let's, let's do it in the first round and finish it. And it turns out that it is wrong. They needed a more coordinated campaign, something more than anti-Erdoganism, and a united policy agenda instead of a united front against Erdogan. Thank you.
Kılıç, thank you, Kılıç. You just pointed out something important I wanted to discuss a bit more. That agenda that was accepted, actually, some of the opposition partners were very confident that, they laid out everything they were going to do. And, in economy, in education, every area, you knew what the opposition was going to do from day one, right? But during the campaign, we've heard many messages, and then we've heard promises to take Turkey back to parliamentarian system. We've heard promises about freedoms being, strengthened. We've heard promises about economy. We've seen promises about, very populist promises, and also like some promises to pursue some, things that were done under AK party. So in many ways, this message doesn't seem to have resonated because they were not quite perhaps on the same page, like you kind of indicated, Kılıç, that I wanted to ask Professor Duran, do you think it was the message that was the problem, or the candidate himself, or a bit both? Because like Kılıç said, this is a big anti-Erdogan, voting bloc, and they have a candidate who is driving the message of the opposition, saying, things are really bad and we need to make a change after all these years. But somehow Erdogan is still mustering 50%, close to 50% support. What is wrong here? Is it the message? Is it the messenger? Or is it a combination of both? Or is it something else? How do you see it?
Well, I think the message and the candidate, both of them were not enough to get the most of the voters, to get the elections. Kılıç mentioned that anti-Erdoganism was the cement that bringing the opposition together. Yes, in such terms, anti-Erdoganism was strong enough to bring some leftist and rightist parties together. But it was not strong enough to make this coalition triumphant in these May 14 elections because of several reasons. As you mentioned, message was not clear. Bringing back this parliamentary system was not a strong message, strong promise for the voters, because the Turkish voters have experienced parliamentary system, and there was no such enthusiasm about this parliamentarism. And these opposition parties proposed some policies, but many of them were not a coherent one. I mean, there was not a coherent vision on the side of the opposition. Even there were some conflictual policy propositions from different parties. So this didn't create a single coherent vision to be taken by the voters and with the leadership of a strong man. Kilicdaroglu was actually able to bring these opposition together, but he didn't provide the voters a charisma or a leadership to challenge President Erdogan and to defeat him. So that it means that the strength of the opposition was the weakness of the opposition in the presidential elections. And also the opposition, I expected opposition would get higher score in parliamentary elections. Actually, the HDP took less votes, and CHP, actually the leader of CHP was the candidate of the nations alliance. So there should be some more votes, at least 30% for this party, but there is no such result in spite of the support of 4 rightist parties to CHP. So when you look at the 2 sides of the elections, on the parliamentary side and on the presidential side, on both sides, opposition get less results than they expected before the elections. So this created so much moral problem on the side of the Kilicdaroglu voters. And will they be able to recover this problem and have a new election campaign for the second round, or this, Erdogan's supremacy will make people less inclined to vote in the second round? That's a big problem for the opposition now, and I expect that they will try to recover their problems and to be united again against Erdogan. But this time, what would be the election campaign for Erdogan, President Erdogan? It is clear that there is an appeal to nationalist voters and criticism of HDP, and a continuation of this propaganda on that line would be enough to get the second round. But also for the voters of metropolitan cities, I think there should be some new elements on both sides. I mean, for the opposition and for the government, because in Istanbul, 1% Kilicdaroglu is ahead than Erdogan, and even in Ankara it is the same. So it means that metropolitan cities will be again very important in the second round.
That was still a better performance than the municipal elections where AK Party lost, as far as I believe. I need to look at the numbers even more closely, but it was still a strong showing for Erdogan, I think, in Istanbul and Ankara. But Kılıç, we talked a bit about the opposition, how they kind of couldn't get the message right. Maybe their candidate was also wrong. And they at the end of the day, CHP received only 25% of the votes. There wasn't a big drive towards CHP either, who was able to put forward their party leader as the candidate. So we talked about the opposition, but can you, maybe you're somebody who've studied leadership and you understand this much better than many people. What is it that Erdogan is doing right? I mean, after 20 years, right, as prime minister, president, what is it that he did right, especially in this election, do you think, that brought him some record number of votes like this?
I think one of the key terms that Professor Duran used was the leadership. Leadership was an important element here. And although there are economic issues in Turkey right now, Turkish people believe that they need an effective leader to resolve that. And in my initial introductory remarks, I said there was some confusion about the message of the opposition. And one of those was the decision-making process itself. So the opposition vice presidential candidates, when they come out and said how the decisions are going to be made, they said the 7 vice presidential candidates needs to agree on a policy to be implemented. And that was never understood by large segments of the Turkish public, because for 7 political parties, these people, 5 of them, 6 of them at least, represents different political parties. 6 political parties to come up with a policy and then to agree on it and agree on the implementation of that policy is considered not very effective way to resolve some of the country's most urgent problems. So President Erdogan, especially after the earthquake and in international arena as well, provided a leadership, but that many Turks in Turkey, whether it's opposition or pro-government, believe that he would be an effective leader for Turkey. I think that leadership was something important. And secondly, I guess there should be also credit needs to be given for AK Parti's party organization itself. So yes, on top there were some political engineering and establishment of the opposition bloc and everything. But in Turkey, one of the most important things in the campaign is to be on the ground, to be familiar with the neighborhood, to have an effective organization to run a campaign. And during this election, on social media maybe, or on a more upper level, the opposition showed a more competitive picture. However, on the ground, AK Party organizations were very effective. They were visiting houses, they were trying to reach out the new voters, which was considered at the beginning one of the weakest points of AK Party. The youth branch of AK Party was trying to reach out to these people. So for the last 2 months, they've pursued a rather effective campaign. And they also showed that the campaign doesn't need to be on political rallies only. Campaign doesn't need to be on the negotiation table with leaders or the 6 leaders showing up together, but also campaign needs to be on the ground. And those successful political campaigns have these strong organization behind it. And AK Party Erdogan demonstrated that they have this effective tool, and because of that they lose votes. AK Party itself lose votes, but they are still the first political party despite being 20 years in the government. I think those were some of the issues that they did right.
Thank you, Kılıç. There's one more, perhaps one question that has to do with the details of what happened exactly. Maybe I'll put that to you, Professor Duran. Why did HDP get fewer votes than expected? They're showing on the, number of MPs, they've gotten 60. That's a very good, number for them, but that was expected, I think, because they were running in some small cities where, they have dominance, but then overall they got something like 8%. And what do you attribute that result to? And, how we've seen them come out in a very big way, very openly supporting CHP and CHP's, the opposition candidate, Kilicdaroglu. Do you think, that didn't mesh, basically, that may have actually worked against Kilicdaroglu? What do you think? Was there, what are the dynamics of the quote-unquote Kurdish vote like that?
Well, Kadir, they changed the name of their parties. Yes, the voters,
they called it Green Left Party,
Party.
right?
Yeah. it is sure that the voters of this HDP, or the new name Green Left Party, are very ideological and very loyal. But still, there was a problem of changing the name. More important than that, for the new election law, the national threshold in Turkey was lowered from 10 to 7. So this means this new party, Green Left Party, can take very easily the votes needed to go beyond this threshold, and it's 7. In the previous elections, they took more than 10. It was just because of the strategic voters coming from the CHP, especially Turkish leftist voters. But this time, there was no such need. And also, there was another Turkish Workers' Party, TIP, was competing under his banner. So I expect that these reasons can explain for the lower percentage of the Green Left Party. But what is crucial here, well, before the elections, it was expected that this Green Left Party could be a key player in the parliament if there was no majority on the side of the People's Alliance and Nations Alliance. It means that you will need HDP, a Green Left Party, to have legislation. But the result is very clear that there is no such need, and there is no such a key player. HDP is not in such a place. So this means that HDP, in spite of the many Kurdish nationalists and Turkish leftist MPs they brought into parliament, and this will be very polemical and debatable issues, but still they are politically not in a very effective position. Well, if that was the other case, that they could be in a key player, I could imagine that there will be much more ideological issues and very policy issues to be contested and so much debated. For the majority is on the side of the Turkish nationalist people, and it means that there will be somehow democratic pressure on HDP, even in the parliament.
Thank you, Professor Duran. I'll ask a very quick question, and then I want to move to foreign policy. From what I can tell, in the second round, Erdogan really has the upper hand. I don't see him losing after this, especially because the opposition leader Kilicdaroglu's supporters are going to be discouraged, I think, after these results, because they were pretty sure that he was going to be ahead, and and both of you said they actually were hoping for a wide margin, and this never transpired. What is your guess for the second round, the runoff election in 2 weeks from now? Do you expect any kind of surprises, upsets against Erdogan after having, gotten 49.5% of the vote? Very quickly, and then I want to go to foreign policy issues.
It will be difficult. I think the opposition at this point cannot continue the same campaign. So if the opposition wants to do better in the second round, there are certain things. Number one, we have a third candidate, Sinan Oğan's votes, and which will be one of the most significant determinant of the election. I'm not saying the single factor, because probably both AK Party and the opposition, the Tayyip Erdogan and Kemal Kilicdaroglu, will try to run a campaign, not like a second round campaign, but a totally new campaign right now. This is more necessary for the opposition, because they have seen that their previous campaign, and just promising that if Erdogan is not president anymore, everything will be better, doesn't work. They need to be able to convince their own electorates. So we don't still have the details when we have the details, we will see how many percent of E-Party people vote for Erdogan as a president, and how many CHP voters actually voted for Erdogan as a president. And in order for the opposition to do better, they need to understand it and try to convince first, yes, Sinan Oğan's voters, which is more than 5%, and they desperately need that. And secondly, they need to understand why their own voters, E-Party, CHP, or Saadet Party's voters went and voted for President Erdogan as the president. And we have only 2 weeks to do that. Right now, it is 13 days left, literally. So in 13 days, they need to do their homework to understand the main issues in voter preferences and try to find solution to cover that. And in the meantime, they need to remobilize their voters because they generated so high expectation among their voters that many opposition voters were expecting not a razor-thin majority victory yesterday. They were expecting a high margin electoral victory against Erdogan. And it didn't happen. And this generated, probably this will generate a huge disillusionment, discouragement among the opposition voters. So they need to be able to kind of energize their voters. And I'm not sure how they're going to do that in 13 days. They need to be able to re-energize their voters to send them to ballot boxes again so that they will re-vote for Kilicdaroglu against Erdogan. So they are at the beginning, when a month ago, let's say, when Muharrem İnce was a candidate with more than 6% vote, there was this expectation that Muharrem İnce will take it to the second round. But in the second round, whoever voted for Muharrem İnce will vote for Kemal Kılıçdaroğlu. And we have seen that even after Muharrem İnce left the race, it didn't happen. And when we look at the numbers, we have seen that some of the Muharrem İnce voters went and voted for Erdogan. And a big portion of them voted for Sinan Oğan. So if the same thing happens with Sinan Oğan's voters, which are compared to Muharrem İnce's voter base, a more ideological, a politically more consolidated voters, if they can do that, and they will try to do that, then they may have a more competitive race in the second round. However, there are so many things they have to do, and they have only 13 days. Again, it will be, of course, a competitive race because of the highly polarized society in Turkey, highly politicized voting blocks. But we have seen that, and we talk about this on Friday, actually, when we are discussing with Professor Duran, that there are some undecided voters who are less ideological, focus more on agenda, leadership, and ability to solve the country's problems. I think the opposition needs to get Sinan Oğan's voters, try to convince nationalists about HDP or Green Left Party. And only after that, they can have a chance to have a competitive race. Of course, I just wanted to add one more thing about the HDP, Green Left Party, and why they are underperformed. Their agenda and their, I think, electoral memoranda didn't provide much about resolving the problems of the Kurdish people. They have this discourse, but their politicized discourse solely, just like opposition, focused on, in quote, getting rid of Erdogan. And if Erdogan is defeated, everything will be better. And I think they were having the same problem with the main opposition parties. And because of that, probably many Kurdish voters, their own base also, didn't find them convincing enough.
Thank you, Kılıç. Professor Duran, Kılıç just triggered something in my mind when he was talking about the things that the opposition has to do. Last night, there was a clear issue of competency as well. We saw early on, İmamoğlu, the vice presidential candidate, and Mansur Yavaş come on screen and saying that, the results are being, kind of, there was a manipulation in terms of perception of the people, and you shouldn't leave the polls, and we are going to emerge victorious, etc. And then along the way, throughout the night, Kilicdaroglu appeared, and this morning he posted a video. It doesn't look like a really competently run campaign. And like Kılıç said, in 13 days, how are they going to put that back on track? The website they promised that was going to, announce the results from CHP's perspective, that website is not even active. So there are many issues on the level of competency. And I want to add one more thing from the audience. They're saying, do you think that the opposition can survive, the alliance can survive if they lose the second round? So let me add that. But again, I still want your question to be somewhat short, so that we can move on to foreign policy. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Kılıç is right in the problems, in referring to the problems of the opposition campaign. Well, actually, it is 12 days, not 13. In such a short time, there is no enough space and time for making a new effective campaign. I don't expect that they will do this successfully. Well, they can. I am not sure about whether they can mobilize even the voters of the four rightist parties, because the parliament elections are over. And some voters, even from CHP voters, will not be so much volunteer to make another energetic moment with the self-esteem that we will get this election for this in the second round. This is somehow difficult. But what about their internal issues? I don't expect that until the second round there will be internal quarrels, at least publicly. But if they lose in the second round, of course, this opposition gathering, this opposition alliance will be on the front lines of many critics coming from their different parties. First from the CHPs, and Kilicdaroglu maybe will be challenged on the basis of leadership. But I expect that even Kilicdaroglu loses the second round, he will not give up. So he will not let the leadership to be taken by İmamoğlu or others. But at the same time, this will create some internal discussions, even for the party leadership. There is no membership to the party in the last 5 years. So they are not opening the party even to the CHP followers. So this will be very criticized. Also, Akşener will criticize Kilicdaroglu, and by the argument that I told this at the beginning, you will not win. You are not the candidate to win. So from all these criticism will come out. And why did we get this four rightist parties? They didn't bring any vote to us. We gave them at least 35 MPs in the parliament on the in disfavor of CHP MPs. So why did we do all of this? And this is a failure. They will discuss this so much. At the end of the day, there will be 14 or 15 parties in the parliament, and the opposition, the balances of the alliances will be changed dramatically if they lose.
Kadir, can I add?
Thank you, Professor Duran. Absolutely, Kılıç. Go ahead.
So I think the opposition bloc continue if they lose the election in the second round. I think it will be very difficult to keep them together. And one of the reasons is it is forming this coalition or bloc or whatever you want to, or alliance, whatever you want to call it, was like riding a bicycle, and riding is winning something. What motivated them in 2018 to continue this alliance was the fact that AK Party lost parliamentary majority. Together with MHP, they still had the majority, but they considered this as a success. And in 2019 municipal elections, winning Istanbul, Ankara, and Antalya was something that they said this provided more fuel for running this alliance. But starting from 2021, actually, when the other political parties also joined, we started to see some disagreements within that. And in this election, if they lose presidential election, nobody will be net winner among these opposition parties, right? Yes, they lose the presidential election. They couldn't get the parliamentary majority, right? The AK Party's alliance still get parliamentary majority. And on top of that, there will be so much internal debates within the political parties. For example, E-Party, who claimed to be the next main opposition party in Turkey, lost its chance. And it is still almost where it was in 2018 election, both in parliamentary, the members, MP level, and also at the vote level. For CHP, it was net loss of around at least 10, 15 MPs, because although they win 20 more, 35, 37 of them will belong to other political parties. And the splinter parties from AK Party, both Babacan's party and Davutoğlu's party, although they got, one of them, Future Party get 10 and Deva get 14, I guess, MPs, at the end of the day, they weren't even on the ballot. So being on the ballot and people voting for you and for your political emblem in the election is something big in Turkish elections. As you may recall,
Well,
when
MHP
announced that it will run by itself, many people said it is very risky. It was a risky decision, but still, in order to survive politically, you have to be, your logo needs to be on the ballot box. You need to run your own campaign. So both Saadet, Deva, and Davutoğlu's Future Party lost their chance. They weren't even on the ballot box despite getting some members. So all of these political parties will have internal debates. And all of these presidential, and remember, this election will be over on May 28 in one way or another. But only 10 months later, there will be municipality elections. And this time, both Ekrem İmamoğlu, Mansur Yavaş, and Muhittin Böcek, everybody who win last municipality elections needs to be competing. And this will generate a little more discussion among E-Party about why are we supporting CHP candidates again. And among CHP people, whether İmamoğlu and Mansur Yavaş will continue, if they continue to be the mayor, are they going to challenge Kemal Kilicdaroglu as the next leader of CHP? So there will be so much internal politicking within the alliance that they may not even have effective and good time to deal with the governing party or AK Party if Erdogan wins the second round of the elections.
Kılıç, again, you pointed out something important. Winning is what, keeps coalitions together. And in this case, there were so many partners of the opposition coalition, including those two mayors of Istanbul and Ankara, that might have implications for the municipal elections next year. So I think if we start talking about next year's municipal elections, we are never going to end this session. But I want to finally move to foreign policy. And one of our questions from the audience, Professor Duran, is what happens if Erdogan wins the second round? And do you expect, in that case, do you expect closer Russian-Turkish relations?
Well, President Erdogan is a well-known politician, and actually President Erdogan is leading Turkey for the last 21st years. So there would be much more stability in terms of foreign policy issues. For relations with Russia, I don't expect much more than that. It's already there's a close relation between Turkey and Russia on certain issues, including energy and some political issues. But you know, President Erdogan's foreign policy is based on the one side being integrated with the Western alliance, but at the same time being critical to some policy issues that are seen as against Turkish national interests. But on the other side, it's a balanced approach to the West, to the discrepancies, to the tensions between the West and Russia. In some issues, Turkey is supporting the Western alliance and their policies towards Russia, but in some others, there is somehow a third way, let's say, a different policy of balance, very similar to other regional powers, including India, Saudi Arabia, and others. So I expect that this kind of diplomacy will continue, but at the same time, President Erdogan will be more diplomatically energetic in trying to solve this Ukrainian crisis, to contribute to the solution to this crisis, and also in some other cooperation issues with the Turkic world, and in providing stability to the Balkans and Transcaucasia, and also economic trade relations and cooperation with Africa. And also the issues of Syria, YPG issues, and FETA, and all of them will continue in their ways as the previous one. But I expect that with the sale of this F-16, there could be some chance to revive the Turkish-American relations. You didn't ask that, maybe, Kadir, but I should add that.
I'm saving that for Kılıç, but go ahead.
Okay, F-16 sale and some other positive agenda with the notion that, with the realization that President Erdogan will lead Turkey in the next 5 years. So there should be some positive agenda between two major allies, the US and Turkey. We expect that this will have a larger space to make cooperation in different issues, including Africa, Central Asian affairs, and others.
Thank you, Professor Duran. Kılıç, the same question to you, but with an addition of the relations with the US. You know, there is a question, if I can maybe tie that as well, the Western media, how, you know, it was perceived in Washington and in Western capitals, that kind of perspective on these election results. There were quite a few controversial headlines and, you know, cover pages of things in the West. You know, please assess the, you know, how the Russia dynamic will continue in your opinion now that Erdogan wins again. I mean, maybe it's too premature still to say that, but my personal opinion, he's going to win the second round. But what happens with the relations with the US as well, and how do you see that kind of outsider look on an analysis on Turkey about elections?
So it is 3 different questions, and we have 3 minutes. So let me try to summarize. Number 1, I agree with Professor Duran in regards to Turkish relation with Russia, and Turkish relation Russia is more complicated than some of the stereotypical foreign policy analysis in some of the Western capitals in regards to close cooperation between Russia and Turkey in all areas. And we have seen these different disagreements from Libya to Syria, from Azerbaijan to Ukrainian crisis. And Turkey successfully compartmentalized this relation for a long period of time. And in regards to Ukrainian crisis, Turkey wants to resolve this crisis in order to not to generate humanitarian tragedy, but also regional implication of it. Because if you put yourself into the shoes of Turkish foreign policy makers, most of the Turkish close trade partners have been either in an internal, in a civil war or war with one another. So Turkey, in order to have a better economic relation and better economic future, wants to contribute for the resolution of all of the regional crises. This is from when there was internal war, civil war in Iraq, from Iraq war to Tehran Declaration, to try to broker an agreement between Azerbaijan and Armenia and all of those, and with Ukraine and Russia. So I think this policy will continue, and this policy is not a policy that only AK Party pursued. Even in 1990s, in those days, Ismail Cem, when he was foreign minister, actually, he was trying to generate a regionally focused foreign policy, and it was part of that. I think it is something that will continue in the next 5 years if Erdogan is elected. And in regards to the image, I think this becomes a little kind of, like the repetitive, that for the last at least 3-4 elections, we keep seeing the same thing in the Western media. There has been so many articles that showed some of the opposition figures as the figure that will defeat Erdogan in the election, that Erdogan needs to be defeated, etc. Those media organizations or those authors may have their own opinions, but at the end of the day, who decides who will run Turkey is the Turkish people. So I think in order to have a better analysis, because even before this election and even before kind of a campaign started, we, in most of the panels that I attended, we tried to say that, look, Turkey has different dynamics, and in order to understand Turkey, social media may not be sufficient tool. And yes, social media and effective use of social media is important, and for the researchers, it may show some things, but it doesn't show full picture of Turkish electoral behavior. So you have to be on the ground, you have to talk with the people, and you have to understand the main concerns and priorities of the Turkish people in order to understand the main factors that Turkish people prioritize when they are voting in the elections. So I think those authors or those analysts, I guess, needs to be a little more nuanced in their approach to Turkey and understand that Turkish voters will basically vote according to their own priorities. And in the last 3 elections, and 2018, 2019, and 2023, I keep seeing those articles in advance signaling that Erdogan not only may lose the election, will lose the election. And I think they are misdirected.
Should lose also.
Pardon me?
Also should lose.
Should lose, yeah. Should lose is a totally different category. So I don't even want to get in that. But this is something that in order not to misinform or misdirect their readers, I think they need to open their doors for more nuanced Turkey analysis as well. That's important. And finally, in 10 seconds for Turkish-American relations, we have several issues, and you don't need to be now a Turkey-American expert to understand what are those top issues. Everybody in Turkey and everybody in Washington who deals with Turkey is so much exposed to those 3-4 issues that everybody knows by heart. And in those issues, United States needs to take some steps. And to kick Turkey from F-35 was a wrong decision. To delay F-16s may not be a good decision, so that needs to basically move ahead very quickly. And YPG issue, this election itself demonstrated how PKK is something important, not only for AK Party voters, CHP voters, E Party voters, definitely MHP voters, all people in Turkey. So YPG issue is so much sensitive that this election needs to tell the people in Washington that in order to at least at the public level to fix U.S. image in Turkey and to improve Turkish-American relations, they definitely need to take some constructive steps in this sense, taking into account Turkey's national security concerns and sensitivities in regards to YPG. And I think for a foreign policy analyst in Washington, this election should, if you ask me, what is one thing that a foreign policy analyst needs to understand in regards to Turkish-American relations is the PKK-YPG issue. And this is something they need to do something in order to improve the relations. And last thing is, of course, President Erdogan is in favor of leader diplomacy. And the better Biden-Erdogan relations, and it is not only about Erdogan, throughout history, we know that from Turgut Özal, George H. Bush, we know that with Clinton and Tansu Çiller for a certain period of time. We know that with President Erdogan and President Obama in his first terms, the presidential foreign policy and the relation with the presidents are the most significant determinant of this bilateral relations. And I think there should be something to be done to improve that side of the relations as well in the next 5 years.
Thank you, Kılıç.
I think Professor Dram wants to add something. Go ahead.
Yes, that's what I wanted to ask him.
If I'm not hijacking your moderation, can I
go ahead.
Can I ask a question to both of you? Because you're studying American politics and you know very well than me. If Erdogan gets the second round, it means that he will have 5 years. And what will be the response of the Biden administration in getting a renewed relationship between the US and Turkey? Because the President Erdogan also will be diplomatically very active in global issues, including the Ukraine war. So do you expect that Biden administration might prefer somehow cooperation in these global issues, or let's wait for a year that for the Republicans?
Kılıç?
It's a good question. So electoral cycles shouldn't be interfering for bilateral relations, because in the next, we have seen this interfering to Turkish-American relations really badly during Obama administration when the Syrian crisis was at its height. I think in the next couple of years, instead of having electoral kind of waiting periods, I think two countries, foreign policy makers, needs to move fast to resolve these problems. And I told you at the beginning that those problems now, everybody knows about those problems, and to try to provide strategic groups, to try to find task forces, to try to resolve these problems one by one is not an effective tool. I think the leaders of those countries, two countries, the foreign policy makers needs to get together, and they need to have this conference literally for a couple of days to resolve their problems. Because the region is changing rapidly. We have seen in the last 3 months how there were different changes in the Middle East and how the Ukrainian crisis is evolving right now. So without any waiting period, I guess, United States and Turkey needs to sit together and resolve those problems. And we have seen for the last couple of years, there was some reluctance in Washington to approach these problems from a different angle. And I think that should be over by now, and that Washington needs to approach Turkey not to try to appease Turkey or try to find a temporary ad hoc solution for the problems. But really, if there is a strategic partnership, and if Washington is willing to continue to have these strategic relations, I think they need to come to the table to resolve all those problems in a very constructive manner. A Biden trip in the next couple of months to Turkey would show that, at least a potential Biden trip, of course, that Washington is willing to move forward. And I think that would be the first step, at least to build trust between two countries.
For my part, I do agree with Kılıç. There needs to be a lot more proactive approach from Washington overall. But since Obama, even Trump, there's this pullback by the United States. The people are not willing to be involved in foreign policy. They don't want to have much to do with often quote unquote the Middle East, and so that attitude is impacting. But then, you know, Turkey is not just a Middle Eastern country. Turkey is also part of Europe, part of NATO, part of international alliances, involved in major global issues, including migration, climate change, etc. So if Biden can definitely find many issue areas that are going to, you know, Turkey's contribution would be well received and would be critical, including, you know, strategic issues. I mean, there's a war in Ukraine right now. There's the Caucasus, Libya, Syria, Iran, right? So all these important issues that Washington foreign policy makers do care about, or should care about, I guess, have something to do with Turkey's foreign policy. So it would be a mistake to kind of just, you know, keep a distance with Turkey, especially given that this country is actually a NATO ally, critically important for inclusion of, you know, Finland, and, you know, we'll see what happens with Sweden in the next few months. I don't expect a major push by the Biden administration, but I would agree with Kılıç that it needs to happen regardless of the election cycles, because Turkey is going to be involved in these areas. So I want to thank both of you very much, and those who are listening to us on social media, as well as joining us on Zoom. Unless my speakers have anything else to add, I would like to conclude this session and thank you all, and we will probably discuss the second round as well, and we'll take it from there. We hope to see you in our future talks and webinars. Thank you very much, Kılıç, and thank you, Burhanettin Hocam.
Thank you, Kılıç. Thank